נגיד את זה בצורה רחבה, אני חושב שהייתה החלטה של המערב לגיטימית, שכרגע צריך להמשיך להכות בפוטין ולא להגיע.
אבל מה זה להכות בפוטין? פוטין ניקה באוקראינה, לא?
שנייה, לא, בסדר, אבל שאל מול, זאת אומרת, הגישה היותר תקיפה,
כן.
אני אגיד לך משהו, אני לא יודע להגיד שהם שגו.
כי אתה אומר, אולי בריונים אחרים בעולם היו רואים את זה.
העמדה שלי באותו הזמן, בעניין הזה זה לא אינטרס לאומי ישראלי.
כן.
בשונה מקונסוליה או איראן, שאני דואג לישראל, עומד חזק פה,
כן.
אין לי סי. אני בסך הכל
כן.
מוציא לפועל ומתווך, אבל הכתובת שלי זה אמריקה בעניין הזה, ואני לא פועל על דעת עצמי. כל פעולה שעשיתי הייתה מתואמת לפרטי פרטים, גם עם ארצות הברית, גם עם גרמניה, גם עם צרפת.
אז הם בעצם חדלו את זה?
בגדול, כן. בגדול הם חדלו את זה, ובאותו זמן חשבתי שהם שוגים.
That was former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett in an interview posted to his YouTube channel this week. Bennett's comments come just after the chief of the United Nations issued a sober warning regarding the potential for a wider war out of the conflict in Ukraine. Quote, "The prospects for peace keep diminishing. The chances of further escalation and bloodshed keep growing. I fear the world is not sleepwalking into a wider war. I fear it is doing so with its eyes wide open."
So he is expressing ideas that we are concerned are true, that there were options for peace and that the U.S. not only didn't take them, but actively sabotaged them out of a desire to have this keep going because it weakens Putin, due to maybe a misguided view that this will ultimately result in his downfall and that will be in the strategic issues of the United States. That is an idea I think is flawed for many reasons. One, I think it is extremely unlikely that this does result in the fall of the Putin administration. That could take years, that could take decades, that could take the risk in that time period of us actually escalating to nuclear conflict is huge. And then I mean, it's worth pointing out that even the downfall of the Putin regime would not necessarily be a benefit to American security. What if Putin was miraculously replaced by a Western-style democratic government? Great, but we've had a lot of problems installing Western-style democratic governments. It could just be another crooked autocrat, or maybe one who is worse. A lot of our nation-building, regime-changing in the Middle East, we found out that, Saddam Hussein, he's terrible, but what replaces him is worse. Muammar Gaddafi, very bad. What replaces him is people being beheaded in swimming pools. It's just horrible.
It's a real be careful what you wish for situation. So apparently, elsewhere in that interview, he was specific about the concessions that Putin was willing to make. Apparently both sides had come to the table and were willing to give some significant concessions before these negotiations were thwarted. The Russian side, he said, dropped denazification as a requirement for the ceasefire. Bennett defined denazification as the removal of Zelensky. So that's take from that what you will. So he agreed to let Zelensky stay in power, at least as long as he was democratically elected to do so. And on the other side, Zelensky would, as part of the negotiations, renounce seeking NATO membership, which Bennett said was the reason for Russia's invasion. So another aspect of this is hearing so clearly from a former leader of one of our most valued allies that a lot of the rationale for why this war started, which was the NATO provocation, is being openly discussed and embraced and understood as kind of like a factual matter, whereas in the United States, saying that NATO provocation had anything to do with it still largely gets you characterized as a Putin puppet, parroting Putin's talking points, trying to misdirect, having a lack of empathy for the suffering of the Ukrainian people and all of this. And you can't help but read into the U.S. refusal to engage in any of that narrative, of the origin story of this conflict, with its inability to get out of the conflict. It seems there's a relationship there. We want the public to think that this was a random act by a crazed lunatic, because that way you're not obliged to negotiate, because you can't negotiate with a crazed lunatic. Right.
But we can always negotiate. We should always be negotiating. The idea that we wouldn't be pressing for negotiation just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't reflect the will of the people in America who have out of the kindness of their heart, obviously none of us had any choice over it, in reality, are funding the Ukrainian defense. And the people in power in the U.S. have signaled time and time again that it's just going to be an indefinite commitment. It's an indefinite commitment, and that it is aiming at weakening Vladimir Putin. And that could go on forever.
Yeah, and it's worth saying again,
that's part of a worldview
so.
that thinks if these things go on forever, it's fine.
Yeah, and it's not just conjecture when we say things like they're wanting to weaken Putin, that's the goal.
No,
We've had any
that.
number of statements from State Department officials, et cetera, who have been very open about that being the goal. In other parts of the world, it's worth noting also that the overwhelming majority of the world, all of the global south basically, is very negative on this conflict. It is not supportive of America's role in this. There are concerns about famine. I believe we're going to talk later today about the earthquake in Turkey. There are implications for Syria, which has already been racked with famine because of the civil war, being further impacted by not only the earthquake but the sanctions and the additionally the lack of food supply coming out of Ukraine, which is the breadbasket of Europe. So all of these tragedies are compounding on each other in ways that a lot of the world can't ignore, because they're already more financially insecure, more food insecure, and more unstable, et cetera. And so we are living in a bubble where we think that everybody agrees with us, and I think these moments from an ally.
Yes, that's important. This official is not anti-U.S. at all. He was very careful what he was saying. He said he takes his cues from the U.S., so he likes and appreciates the alliance between Israel and the U.S. And he said that when it concerns Iranian policy, for example, that's Israel's forte. That he feels very strongly it should be one way. You might disagree with I might disagree with what that policy is, but he's saying Israel gets to set that policy. He's saying for this, okay, this isn't really
our business.
This isn't our business. We're kind of neutral here. Yeah. This is a dispute between other countries. And here was the arrangement we were working on, but I listened to what the U.S. has to say, and the U.S. said no.
Yeah.
And he was just stating that. He wasn't even condemning, he was just saying that's the reality. So that's when you have to listen to that and say, that sounds like it probably did happen.
I don't expect that clip to get a lot of mainstream airing, but let us know if you see there are any mainstream media discussions of that and the implications of us not having the consensus that we pretend we have here in the United States, and we'll have more Rising for you after this.